Hello, welcome to um, Mutual Aid Village Playground, Village Network Playground. And we want to give you a update. Our last update was in July, and yeah. So last time we gave you a report on the Happy Money story, how we allocated the 4,500 US dollars from the micro grant, and a lot has happened since then. And we'll first maybe tell you a couple of critical events that happened between then and today is October the 20th. So, shall we have a kind of a popcorn round of what are some of the critical events that that you remember?
Well, definitely one of them is that we went on retreat together in Seattle.
And that was a part of us kind of visioning this eventual long-term village that would have regular in-person gatherings, perhaps once a year. So it was our initiating of that.
Mhm. We spent a lot of time during that retreat on the investigating and caring for the relational level amongst the five of us. And Carol brought in an activity that she called awareness domes, where someone sits in the middle and the rest sit outside in a circle. And the practice is one of the person in the middle tuning into their body and tuning into whatever is important or salient to them and allowing their awareness to be attracted to whatever feels most important or salient. And then everyone else contributes or participates by lending their awareness, just seeing whatever they notice and then reflecting whatever they notice back to the person in the middle.
And that was a very significant activity for us because um, we kind of did it in short form and then in longer form, and it gave us a chance to really center around each other and what was alive in our lives and our learning edges and where we could use support.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then we could do that at different levels. We could do the dome of awareness at the individual level, at the community level, at the system level. Um, yeah, yeah.
And our typical virtual meetings are very designy themed. And the retreat, it felt very doing and being the village together. So much so that felt like a marked difference. And somebody might look at the retreat of our first 3 days and go like, what are you doing? You're not doing the thing that you usually do. You're just like relational. Okay, you've totally switched gears into a different thing. And then the Wednesday night of the retreat, turned into that what we ended up calling the geyser conversation, where we finally zoomed over into the design space and things just flowed and popped and fizzed. Um,
Like a geyser, eruption of of ideas and creativity.
Mhm.
Um, we can talk a little bit. We can name a few of the outcomes in this video as well. Yeah. Yeah, and another critical event, well, I don't know if it's critical event, but it's something that we can report on, is we started different experiments following, the Happy Money story, how we want to allocate money. And then one of them is called Pass the Hat. And it's basically there is a virtual hat that goes into each of our bank accounts. And when the hat lands in my bank account, I can decide whether I want to take some money from the hat or give some money into the hat. I cannot do nothing. That's the only thing. That's the only rule, pretty much. And then we've done 2 rounds of them, and at each round consists, the hat goes through all 5 of us, And at the end of each round, we have a reflection about what we have learned. And then the main intention of that experiment is to learn how do we want to, like, is to learn about giving and receiving money, but also different forms of care, different forms of flow that flow with the hat. And yeah, and then we will potentially write about our learnings in a blog article or something.
Mhm. Yeah, and another relevant thing that's happened is getting back from the retreat, where we had experienced quite a bit of connection with one another and also some creative ideas, particularly in this geyser conversation about what the future might look like. There was then this question of how does that experience integrate into our typical rhythm and flow. And so what we decided to do was to return to something that's called a system scan that we started 6 or 9 months ago. We had come up with a number of different categories that were helpful lenses for looking at the entirety of what we're doing together. And at that time, like back earlier in the year, we had kind of assessed of all of these areas of our collective system, which ones feel on track, which ones are kind of have more than enough attention, and which ones need more attention now. And so we went back and looked at that original assessment of things. And then we kind of started to think about how do things feel now? And also, does the way that we've structured this assessment still feel like it's the best way of thinking about what's going on? Or do we want to change up our framework given some of the experiences that we recently had?
Yeah, and I feel like that call was both a restructuring of what the system scan, what form we could use to check in on our system, as well as a check-in in parallel. It felt like we kind of went through a historic sense of where we've been at and how satisfied we're feeling. And we also, throughout the call, came up with different categories. James offered some that he used a few words from, like being the village, doing the village, building the village, and spreading the village. And I think that kind of transitioned into a sense of 3 categories that are, I'm not sure if we're clear on the wording of, but something about doing like the theory and design and writing, doing experiments and doming and supporting each other. And another way of describing it is like focusing on the deep intimacy of the crew of us, and focusing on our learning and on our collective thinking and the theories that we have in the design of the future that we're building.
Great. Yeah, so maybe we'll give people a little bit just uh overview about what's new. We just did a system scan, and now some of the highlights of our system.
Would you like to start that, Carol?
Yeah, one thing, I think Narayan in our meeting last time just named a few really shiny points of the system now. So Narayan, I'll start with one and then you can chime in. Um, One is about our system. What's becoming more and more obvious is this deep intimacy, this deep connection that I think we've been feeling that ever since the start of the 5 of us. We feel a yearning of that at the very beginning, and that has been always in our priority. And then the in-person retreat just confirmed that, and even deepened that even more. So that's a high level kind of, I guess, characteristic about our village, our network. Narayan, you want to chime in with, you put 3 diamonds on our, my Miro board.
And maybe I'll share my screen because it has a bit of a framework in terms of how I've been thinking of this.
Great.
Yeah. So I hear what you're talking about. I call them gems. Put a little gemstone diagram there. But like, what are some of these visible things that seem to be important to us or meaningful to us? And so you mentioned this deep intimacy, and for me, the visible thing was James in the last meeting saying he feels like he could imagine being in relationship with all of us in 20 years. And that feels quite related to this deep intimacy that we've been building together. We've also had this during the geyser conversation. We had this really cool idea of honeycombing as a way of scaling, which has been a question that we've been holding. And so there's something that led us to this collective thing going, oh, this makes a lot of sense. And it was quite a different way of thinking, or it was quite a different thought around scaling than we'd been thinking before. And so there'd been something around our collective thinking that seems to be shifting and changing throughout this process. And like, how are we doing what I would refer to as collective intelligence, and how are we improving our capacity to think with each other so that we can have these kinds of collective insights that are only possible maybe after retreat or with this level of intimacy and information flow between each of us. And something that's been related to that as well.
Narayan,
Oh,
do you want to
yeah.
just say a little bit about honeycombing? I don't think people know what that means. Yeah.
Sure. So I think when we were thinking of scaling, it's like this question of how do we grow the village? There's 5 of us in it right now. What would it take to get to 20 people? And does that look like us inviting more and more people into our container? How does our history scale? How do people step into culture? And something that a new hypothesis is this idea that we're creating a bit of a cell in a honeycomb, and that the 5 of us could be some sort of cell, and that maybe what we actually need to do is support a second cell who would develop their own culture and be allowed to grow independent of us while being connected to us. And we would ask this question around what does cell-to-cell support look like? And then could we have another cell appear? And this is somewhat similar. It's not necessarily brand new to us. Like micro-solidarity and different crews and congregations kind of has similar language. But for us, I think there's a way that this idea landed in us and feels much more tangible in an embodied sense as quite possible. And we started asking what other cells are already forming around us that we're in relationship with.
Great. Yeah. And then I'll just say that we're also now in the process of thinking about how do we invite the second cell in, and writing handbooks, writing a handbook to help set the next cell for success. Yeah, back to you, Narayan.
Well, and I hear you going down to the second level, which is this question of how might we support others in creating the conditions, which maybe is under this, like, how are we doing this? These are the conditions that are leading to some of these outcomes that feel important to us. And so the idea of doing a handbook would be one of those support elements that we might create. And we've also talked about storytelling and I think earlier maybe immersive experiences. Yeah.
And do you want to, I stopped you at the deep learning. Do you want to talk a little bit more about deep learning, or you feel complete?
Well, it's interesting because like this practice of doming, it feels like it's a modality I can imagine reading about online and saying, oh, okay, I'll do this with other people, but then it not actually having that sort of magic that made this actually feel so meaningful for us. And for me, I think of it as like, together we've actually been learning through all of the months that we've spent in dialogue so that when Carol said, hey, I have this idea of having each of us sitting in a circle surrounding somebody in the middle, and this sharing of perspectives, this person in the middle shares what they're seeing about something that's important to them, and the other people around it aren't necessarily sharing or like trying to help specifically, but just sharing what is in their awareness as they see this person in 360 degrees. It took some sort of collective learning to get us to the point where we could hear this prompt for a new form and to create something new out of it so that it came alive, like the structure of this form came alive for us in a different way. And how did we do this deep learning together so that we actually were able to create a living process that we're calling this practice of doming that has been so impactful for us? But maybe we could have called it deep support, because that's something else that's sort of coming out of this practice of doming. And of course, this chart right here is so simplified, because the deep support's the creating the intimacy, and the handbook may then support this theory of honeycombing, and I don't know, the collective thinking has led to deep learning. Yeah. But I'll pause here and sort of see where people want to take this.
I'm just
And would it be helpful for me to leave this up or take it down?
You could leave it up for a moment.
All right.
I'm
And
just experiencing the magic of Narayan doing the the mapping, the flow chart, you know, on the fly. I'm loving it.
I feel like the deep learning has been, in some way, it feels central to all of these areas, not just the doming, and it feels related to the question of how can we study what we're doing in a way that allows us to be able to share it and be able to have other people have a peek into it and try things out and learn alongside us. And that's part of what the handbook is aiming to be an output of, is us really explicating what have we been learning, what have we been doing, and how might other people try it on, and what might be unique for them. Yeah, we can take the screen down now.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in with a +1 on what feels like the magic of doing it, and certainly it was having plenty of time, it was being in person, it was, you know, being on retreat together, very, very much kind of special conditions, but something about the care, that the firm foundation of intimacy and care and learning and support, I'll just sort of mix all those together, really makes for, in my view, the power of it. Because we came back, you know, and I'm doing practices with Intentional Society frequently, and I said, oh, let's do something similar in that context. And I brought it there and sort of translated a little bit, and we did it. And of course, it wasn't similarly powerful in the same way. It didn't have the same effect. So yeah, it definitely points me back into like, oh, all these things feed into each other. And it's the whole system that holistically together has that power.
Yeah, that also makes me think that one of the things we've been aware of and studying is how to do the kinds of experiments we've been doing in a culture of high trust, and what supports a culture of high trust. And so that's a main part of our thinking in terms of how do we scale this and grow this, is that anyone that comes into a second cell would need a culture of trust, or to be building trust, not naively, amongst themselves, in order to be experimenting with the kinds of things that we're doing. And that feels like a big part of what we're studying as well.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing that I want to add, like about the magic of the dome of awareness, is that actually in the first day, I remember the first day of our retreat, maybe it's in the afternoon, we started a conversation, a very emergent conversation, and then there are two themes that became all shared by all five of us. One is the importance of awareness. And we were talking about what change do we see the world needs. And then I remember, this is my recollection, I could be wrong, is that we feel there's all kinds of resources. A lot of people are doing good things with good intentions, but oftentimes we find the awareness, either individual or collective, is very shallow. So then people stuck in silos, people don't share resources, people end up fighting, people have no directions, no sense of direction. So all five of us has been kind of like practicing how to deepen our awareness for a long time now. And then so when we combine our awareness in an intentional dome, you can imagine how powerful that can be. So it's not just the form of a specific practice. It's also our deep, personal practice for a long time. And then when we come together, we know how powerful it can be. The second thing I think it was collectively shared among us is really the sense about, we actually potentially, for the world to change, we already have all the resources we need, but all the resources are just stuck in silos, and people are hoarding them, or there's the haves and then there's the have-nots, and then like what we are trying to practice in our village is really about flowing them, is really about using deep awareness to flow the resources to where it's needed, to where it's needed the most. And so that practice of doming, that deep care, it stems from that theme of how might we use our awareness and collective wisdom to flow the resources to where it's needed. So in some ways, I feel if people don't have these kind of intentions or practices, then just having, just call it, oh, let's just have a doming practice, it's probably gonna be pretty shallow. I mean, not in a not to judge them to be bad, but I'm just saying the form seems simple, but there's a lot of kind of deeper practice and intentions that set the foundation for it.
I suspect in doming as well, like we could even think of our awareness as something, as a resource that is trapped in 5 silos. And that even the doming itself is a practice in flowing our awareness to where it would be of most value. And awareness is potentially abundant and non-scarce, non-finite. So there's a creation of more with the flows. How would we like to wrap up?
Yeah, I feel us in a really good place right now. And it's interesting because I think the initial grant that we received was very stimulating for our learning. But I feel at this point that we're learning so much about our own relationships with the resources we already have and with each other. And so it feels like a different kind of phase of getting at like, what is the thing that we're doing together that we want to be practicing and learning with others around.
Yeah, maybe we'll leave each with a question. What's a lingering question that we want to explore, either short term or long term? And yeah, we don't have to each have one question, but just maybe surface a couple of questions, and that's how we wrap up.
I think I'm really curious about what kinds of experiences we can have with other people, maybe even before having another cell, like what kinds of experiments we can run in just a broader window, just to get a sense of like outside of the five of us with our unique histories and backgrounds, how do people experience this, and what kinds of things can we try out together that could be stimulating of a lot of learning for us?
We've recently decided to switch from a 2-week meeting cadence to a 1-week meeting cadence. I'm curious how we will find ourselves wanting to spend our time during those meetings.
And I'm curious how the handbook will end up looking, and how we'll avoid perhaps trying to, something coming out looking like a recipe. And how do we encode the kind of like meta-systematic properties of what we're doing in some sort of pointer, or in that handbook. So that's a key dimension there for me.
Yeah, to build on that, that actually, I have a question of like, the five of us, we're exploring something that we are interested in. And then when we discover it, there is that excitement. It's like, whoa, we just discovered something now we want to share. And then I wonder how that excitement can be kept fresh, when it's the second cell of people, right? When we're interacting with others, so that it's not like we are teaching other people, what we learn. And when you learn it secondhand, it's never fresh or it's never exciting. So I'm just curious, how might we keep that excitement of learning fresh? Yeah.
I found a lot of value in this reflection. I think each of you surfaced things that I had forgotten about and brought it alive again. And I wonder, how do I stop forgetting? How do our learnings, how do these gems integrate more into my present experience of every day? Because they feel so important in the moment when we have those conversations, and they last with me for maybe a week or two after, but then they fade. And then we come together and we have new insights as well. But this reminding process feels also important.
Yeah, thank you. I shared that question. That's why I keep coming back to you guys. All right. Shall we say goodbye?
Yep. Thanks.